Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
This week, the return of state worker furloughs as Sacramento lawmakers remain deadlocked over a state budget. Republican Sam Blakesley wins the seat held by Lieutenant Governor Abel Maldonado, leaving the Democrats without a two-thirds majority. Hewlett-Packard CEO Mark Hurd has resigned, but the scandal involving him deepens. Also, the second part of my conversation with U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, coming up next.
Really across many lines.
Good evening. I'm Belva Davis. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel, Benjamin Pimentel, technology reporter with MarketWatch on leadership at Hewlett-Packard. Josh Richmond, legal and political affairs reporter for the Oakland Tribune on the outcome of Tuesday's special election in the 15th Senate District. And starting with Stu Wu, reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Stu, in addition to a court win by the governor on the issue of furloughs, there was also word now from the state controller that he's thinking that the state has reached the point where it must issue IOUs. Now, what is this going to do to California in the financial markets and the view of this state?
Right, it feels like deja vu. We went through the same thing last year. Well, the reason for all this is because there's this budget impasse again in Sacramento. We were supposed to have a budget by July 1st, and there's been an impasse because the Democrats in the legislature want a budget that raises taxes. The Republicans, including Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, want no new taxes and a budget relies more heavily on spending cuts.
Maybe we could say the Democrats do not want to vote for the kind of cuts the governor's proposed, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely not, especially in an election year. But to answer your question about what it will do to state finances, we're losing money. We're losing chances to raise revenue and cut spending every day because of the late budget. And we're going to run out of money by late October. So the state controller on Wednesday said that, well, if we don't have a budget in 2 to 4 weeks, I'm going to have to start issuing IOUs. And what that means is that Wall Street doesn't like that very much. They're going to charge more for the state for its usual borrowing every year, and the state will also have to pay interest on the IOUs.
So, is there any hope on the horizon that the issue that we need, a budget, is anywhere even on the table?
This year looks even worse than the past years. There's actually no sign of a budget coming in the next few weeks. So the controller warned last year, if there's no budget, there's going to be IOUs, and that's what happened, and it could happen again this year.
We've had some leadership changes this year, and you've got another one coming in the state Senate. The Republican leader is changing over on September 1st. How does that affect? Are we pushing the reset button here, basically?
Right. You have, the budgets are usually determined by what's called the Big Five: the governor and the leader of the Assembly and the Senate. And when a new person enters a conversation, they lose that trust that the old leader, left with. So it is sort of a reset, but there is some transition time. So maybe, who knows? Maybe they'll even have a better relationship than their predecessor.
What does the fact that Arnold Schwarzenegger is leaving have to do with this? I mean, what is your take on his own take on his legacy? I mean, given that he's stepping down at a time when he's doing these furloughs.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about him being a lame duck, but actually, governors, if you look at governors in their last term, they actually get a lot of what they want in their last budget because they can afford to wait for what they want. And the governor is putting his foot down. He's also saying, in addition to no new taxes in this budget, I'm not going to sign a budget without revisions to the budget system and the pension system. And he can afford to wait while the Democrats and Republicans in the legislature want to get a budget done so they can go back and start campaigning and raising money for the November elections.
Josh brought up the issue of a change in the team that has to bring this together. Can you give us a little insight about who's going and who's coming?
Yeah, there's a Big Five. The Republican Senate leader Hollingsworth is leaving, and there's going to be a replacement coming up in a few months. And in addition to that, the Democratic Speaker of the Assembly, John Perez, is doing his first budget right now. So I think everybody right now is just feeling each other out and trying to see who's going to blink first.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, who would be, if the IOUs, if we come to that, who would be paid with these IOUs?
The first IOUs would go to state contractors and local governments, as well as the residents expecting income tax returns and college students expecting scholarships. So many banks said last year that we'll accept these IOUs, but only for a limited time. So there's a chance that could happen again. But again, last year we issued $2.6 billion in IOUs, and a lot of that money is not going to the economy. So IOUs are not a good thing to be issuing when you're in a recession.
So what's the biggest fear? What's the worst case scenario on this?
Worst case scenario is that we don't get a budget until there's a new governor, and we're going to be issuing IOUs for 3-4 months, and the state's credit rating takes a hit, and maybe even to junk bond status. Who knows what will happen?
We talked about comings and goings, and you were saying the names of people, but their positions really in terms of, will we get a Republican that is even more firmly committed to no taxes, or will we get somebody who maybe is new and might want to explore some of the possibilities?
It's almost a certainty that whoever the next Republican leader is, or whoever the Republican leader is going to say no to taxes. You saw what happened last year when a few Republicans voted for taxes. There were recall drives launched against them. So if the Republicans are going to be selecting a new leader, it's definitely going to be one that's going to hold the line against taxes.
Well, there's going to be a new member of the Senate, at least on the way. Josh, that's your story about Senate District 15, where Lieutenant Governor Maldonado is now Lieutenant Governor,
Right.
his old seat. Tell us about the outcome of the election for his
Well,
seat.
the Democrats spent millions of dollars. The Republicans spent millions of dollars. The Independent Expenditures Committees spent even more millions of dollars. The taxpayers in 5 counties shelled out for special elections. And we are right back where we started from, with a Republican state senator serving the 15th Senate District. Sam Blakesley prevailed on Tuesday night, although a lot of the ballots apparently had been cast absentee earlier. He defeated, he's the assemblyman from San Luis Obispo. He defeated the former assemblyman John Laird from Santa Cruz. What this really came down to in large part was turnout. It is actually a Democratic-leaning district. They have a 6 or 7 point registration edge. But because this election was not consolidated with November's general election, when there would have been significantly higher turnout, the more conservative, more southern parts of this district were able to turn out more voters and carry the day, and Blakesley ended up prevailing by about 4.5 points or so. So what this means is that the Democrats, who had desperately wanted to pick this up because it would have put them within 1 vote of a 2/3 majority in the Senate, are still now 2 votes away from that 2/3 majority. They'll still probably fight pretty hard in the 12th state Senate district, where Jeff Denham is now running for Congress. But obviously the stakes are not as large, since that would not be the deciding vote anymore, essentially. And of course, the Assembly would still be far from a 2/3 majority, so that wouldn't be a budget solution anyway. So,
Are there any implications for the gubernatorial race?
I don't think so. You know, I saw some press releases. You know, organizations like the Republican State Leadership Committee put out some information saying, you know, this is evidence that Republicans are benefiting from a growing wave heading into the November elections. I think, you know, it's hard to say that when basically this victory for the GOP was dependent on a somewhat depressed turnout. You know, I think if that's the way that they have to win an election, then maybe
and
that's
talk
not
about the
exactly
governor's
a wave.
role in that, that timing.
Yeah, the governor had steadfastly refused to consolidate this with the November election. The Democrats pressured him to do so, citing the millions of dollars it would cost to hold special elections. But he knew that would make it a lot easier for the Democrats to make this a pickup. He wouldn't do it. You know, the Democrats and the legislature had engaged in gamesmanship in confirming Maldonado in the first place, hoping that they could push it to where this could be consolidated. The governor said, nope, not going to do it. And although he may not be terribly popular with his party, he definitely carried the flag for them on this.
Yeah. Is there any thought that Blakesley might be the kind of swing vote that Maldonado was in the legislature, because it's, you know, coming from a district where there's about an equal number of Democrats and Republicans?
Yeah, it's actually more Democrats than Republicans, but I don't think he feels that's sort of a mandate. This district has been sending Republicans to the state Senate for a while now. Moderate Republican like Abel Maldonado is a good example. And Maldonado had that reputation as a wheeler dealer. He has been the swing vote. He cut various deals to get his vote on the budget. I don't think you're going to see quite the same thing from Blakesley necessarily. You know, the Democrats will always look to the districts where they have an edge in terms of trying to leverage these people, but I don't think he's not going to be starting from the same sort of place that Maldonado was, I think.
People thought that Blakesley would be in some trouble because of the huge Gulf oil spill.
Yeah, he's a
and
former
he's got
oil
all
man.
this coastline, and he's a former oil guy. That didn't hurt him at all.
Didn't stick. You know, the California Democratic Party had been confident enough that it would stick that they launched the www.oilmansam.com website. But in the end, it didn't turn out to be a swing issue for this. I don't think people were really all that moved by it. So.
On the other side of the issue,
Yes.
Mr. Laird is an openly gay man.
He is.
This was when we were all, you know, with so much news about Prop 8 and that debate. Did this, you think, have an effect on his
I think that would be really
possibilities?
hard to quantify. It's entirely possible because ballots were being cast, you know, while absentee ballots, mail-in ballots were being cast while the Prop 8 decision from the federal courts was in the news. And perhaps some of the more conservative quarters of the district were moved by that. I don't think you can necessarily point to that as a single causal factor, but it might have contributed.
No, it's been a good year for people selling commercials in Memphis.
That it has. Yeah.
If we had a couple $1 million just down in that one area. Well, thinking of dollars, let's turn to HP. Big company, big dollars, big CEO, but the CEO has been in trouble for some time now. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, well, it was actually a surprise what happened to Mark Hurd because for a time he was sort of a figure of stability, you know, someone who stabilized the company after a decade, after many years of uncertainty. And then you have this controversy over him stepping down, apparently over allegations of sexual harassment that the company said were found to be not true, but then he was also accused of violating the conduct of business for proper conduct for a CEO involving inaccurate expense reports. So that has ended, it's plunged this Silicon Valley icon in a time of crisis and uncertainty at a very critical time because HP is facing a lot of competition right now.
Before the program, I was saying to you, it just seems as though all we've reported on in the last few years is HP's trouble.
Yes.
Has anybody figured out what is with this company that seems to be able to make money but just not stay out of the news for other reasons?
Well, you know, HP is, as I said, is a symbol of Silicon Valley. The garage where it was created is designated as the birthplace of Silicon Valley. For a long time, it's been known as a company that a company of engineers that created a lot of excellent products and had this collegial culture. But then over the past decade, and Mark Hurd's resignation actually capped a very tough decade for HP where they had, you know, during the Carly Fiorina years, you had the proxy war over Compaq, and then she was dismissed. And then for a time, over at least the last 5 years, it seemed like the company was in good shape. The stock was rising. It was becoming a much more global, powerful competitor. But then this happened. And you're right, people are starting to worry that, you know, every few years something like this happens.
I know we're wondering sort of what this actually was,
Yes,
and we may never know. But it almost seems like something that maybe could have even been kept quiet and didn't necessarily have to be a career killer. Were there other things that played into this, possibly? Or?
It's a strange thing because the official line, as I said, was that there was this allegation of sexual harassment. It was found not to be true, but he also committed some mistakes that were grounds for him to be dismissed or to be asked to step down. Right. But over the past week, there's been a lot of back and forth, but involving sources that are just familiar with the situation. They're unnamed sources about what really happened. I guess HP line is that he settled the case without telling them, and that surprised the board. The other side is saying no, that's not true. So it is a fairly complicated situation where a lot of the things we may never know. A lot of analysts I've talked to are speculating that perhaps the fear of the board was this was like another Tiger Woods situation where there were a lot of things that they don't know and they're afraid may come out and will hurt the company.
What were the direct impacts to HP in terms of reputation and finances?
Well, the stock price took a big hit. I think it's been down 10% over since this thing happened. A lot of speculation on how it affects their ability to win big contracts, especially now where corporate technology is a very important component of the company and the competition in the technology industry. You're talking about million-dollar deals where you have you have to have the CEO negotiating these deals. So there are questions on they have to have a new leader, and that's the big question now. Until they name the new leader and Wall Street and the industry is able to analyze who that is, then
You said earlier that there were charges of sexual harassment, but they were proven not to be true. Proven by whom?
well, according to the company, they looked into the allegations, which I guess came up in June, and based on their investigation, there was nothing to it. But he did violate certain codes of conduct related to expense reports, and then it came out later on that Heard had settled on his own without HP getting involved this harassment claim, which effectively, I guess, the speculation is that it prevented the company from finding out more, because when you have a settlement, of course, there's usually a gag order.
There is a shareholders lawsuit.
Yes.
What does that mean?
That was sort of expected, because there's a lot of talk about whether, because Mark Heard walked away with at least a $12 million severance. It's probably more, if, depending on how you calculate the stocks involved. And so there are a lot of shareholders will be upset about that. There are analysts who are questioning whether it was the right move, as you said. Could this not have been settled some other way without him having to leave? Because he was pretty popular on Wall Street. He did make the company very competitive and profitable.
So we've not heard the last of this because there are still open questions.
Well, the big question now is who's going to lead HP?
Right. Well, my thanks to all of you for joining me here tonight. And now some other news from this week. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals extended Judge Vaughn Walker's stay on same-sex marriages until December while it considers the case. Some good news as the school year begins. Standardized test scores just released show modest signs of improvement in California's public schools for the 8th year in a row, and the state will receive $213 million of federal stimulus funds for kindergarten through 12th grade. Ownership of Treasure Island has been transferred to San Francisco from the Navy. There are plans to transform the 400-acre island into the city's newest neighborhood, with housing, hotels, a 60-story skyscraper, and open space. Silicon Valley chipmaker Intel made a surprise announcement that it plans to buy antivirus software maker McAfee for $7.7 billion. The move raises questions about consolidation in the technology sector. Well, in a moment, part 2 of my conversation with Senator Barbara Boxer. Last week, I spoke with Barbara Boxer about jobs and the recession. This week's conversation centers on immigration and the battle over partisan power in the upcoming election. The 3-term U.S. Senator is facing the most challenging race of her career against former HP CEO Carly Fiorina. Here's the second part of our conversation. As much as the president talked about immigration being an issue, something to be solved, nothing has come from the Congress, nothing has passed his desk, nothing has even come out that anybody said had a chance of passing. Do you think there's a chance that there could be immigration reform legislation this year before the midterm elections?
I would like to see us finish immigration reform once and for all by the end of the year. Belva, I had the opportunity to vote for 2 bills that were comprehensive immigration reform, and they were bipartisan. They were Kennedy McCain, they were Kennedy Specter. This was back in '06 and '07. And unfortunately, there were filibusters. And so we weren't able to get the 60 votes. And as a result, the issue festers. Now, to me, I see it very clearly, a path forward. You got the people who say, border enforcement only. Now, we absolutely have to enforce our borders like every other country. You have to do it right. And we have increased Border Patrol agents by about 5 times. We've gone up to about 20,000 agents on the border, and we just did another increase. But And we have controlled more of the border, but still in all, it's still too porous. Then you have those who say, look, we've got 11 million people here who are hiding in the shadows. It's wrong. We have to figure out a pathway for the good people who are here. If they commit crimes, they should be deported. If they're good people, let's figure out a pathway forward. We got to meet in the middle, the two sides. And we can do this. I know we can, because actually Chuck Schumer and Lindsey Graham met in the middle and have a bill. So I have written to the president, and I've spoken to my colleagues. I would like to move forward with this because it's an economic issue when people are living in the shadows. It's just not healthy. It's wrong, and we have to figure it out, and we can figure it out.
Because of the increase in raids and other negative impacts on the Hispanic community, can Democrats, do you think, count on Latinos coming to the polls to continue their loyalty to the Democratic Party?
Well, I just have to say this. I think it's very clear between the two parties who's trying to resolve this and who's not. I mean, you have people who are saying, let's repeal the 14th Amendment, for God's sakes. You know, as somebody wrote, that's taking leave of our senses. If you're born in America, you're an American citizen. That's a basic premise. So you have people doing that. Those are the Republicans. And so I think it's our job as Republicans and Democrats, again, to come forward and take care of this. You have a lot of people who have backed the Arizona law. Well, the Arizona law, like my opponent did, it's very divisive. It targets, you know, Latinos, no question about it. So I think Latinos know where our hearts are. But to get to your point, I take nothing for granted. We need to show that we can legislate. That's why I've been pushing the DREAM Act, which would help with our young people and get them a path to legality and give them an education. And also, I've been pushing Ag Jobs, which is a very good bill that Senator Feinstein and I wrote, which would legalize the agricultural workers but not set up a guest worker system that's exploitive. So we have all this to do, and we need a path to legality, and I think that the Hispanic community knows who's on their side. I really do.
We want to get to the environment, but before that, on this topic, Hispanics were hit hard by the housing meltdown, especially out in the Central Valley. The home foreclosures was high. What is or can Congress do at this point to protect people who continue every day to lose their homes in this economy?
Well, I would say that many people lost their homes across ethnic lines, really across many lines. And I think clearly what we have to do is give people a chance to refinance, because interest rates are so low right now. If people are stuck with an interest rate of 6% or 7% and they can go down to 4%, could make all the difference in the world. So we have a program that President Obama is pushing. It needs to do better. In addition, I don't know if you're aware of this, many of our families, if they could go to bankruptcy court, could get the judge to order lower payments, and everybody would come together and do that, the banks and the consumer. There's an anomaly in our bankruptcy law. You're allowed to, if you go bankrupt, everything but your main house gets to be part of the settlement. And we need to change that law, but the banks don't like it. But it would be very important to keep people in their homes, to give them a chance to have a bankruptcy judge figure out a way that the bank gets their money a little slower than they'd want, but people get to stay in their homes. By the way, we've had several votes on it, and we've lost those votes by a hair. It's very frustrating.
On the environment, California is faced with the Proposition 23, that could weaken the environmental laws passed here. You chair the most powerful environmental committee in the Senate. Where are we in terms of people's belief in global warming and believing this is the answer? And are the jobs there even if we accept it as true?
Well, the first thing I want to say is if we pass clean energy legislation, we create millions of jobs, even in this deep, dark recession. Because of our laws in California that are cutting edge on the environment, we have seen 10,000 new businesses take hold and 125,000 new jobs. This disastrous proposition to roll back, or actually delay it many years, our global warming legislation would be terrible. And guess who's paying for it, Belva? The big oil companies from Texas. My opponent supports that. She's getting money from King Coal, the coal community. This is the future versus the past. We've got to move to clean energy. the country that does it and the state that does it is going to be the leader in this century. So we need to do it.
Finally, do you fear, as some pundits are saying, that Democrats could lose both the House and the Senate, that we could have a turnover in the Congress this year?
You know, you never know what happens until it happens, but in my gut, I believe people are smart enough to know we don't want to go back to the days of George Bush. And that's what my opponents are espousing, you know, tax cuts to the wealthy few, deregulation, that's their plan. Well, we saw what happened with their plan. The deepest, darkest recession since the Great Depression. I think at the end of the day, look, people aren't happy. They want change to come quicker. They have to remember we were losing 700,000 jobs a month when the president took over, this president. And he was handed a huge deficit of $1 trillion. And yes, we've turned it around too slowly, but we're moving forward, and we have to keep our courage. We don't want to go backwards, because I think that would be a disaster. And I think that's what my election is about to a great degree, and elections all across the country.
Well, we've invited Carly Fiorina, Senator Boxer's opponent, to be a guest on this program. And that's all for tonight. Find us anytime at kqed.org/thisweek to watch complete episodes and segments of our program. You can also subscribe to our newsletter and our podcast and share your thoughts about the show. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.